Hello everybody, welcome back to the Flix Files. So we're now on episode 3 of my series of videos showcasing select films from the 1980s. So if you haven't seen the previous 2 videos, do check them out. But the idea is I'm focusing on a specific year in each video. And for that year, I'm looking at the films that I own that were made in that year and picking out select ones that really, in my eyes, show off the cream of the crop of movies from that year. So there may be people watching this that will say, well, why didn't you mention this movie that was released that year or that movie? For the simple reason I'm only talking about films that I actually own. So obviously many films released through the 1980s. And I have a kind of curated collection of 80s films. I only buy movies that I enjoy and that I've watched. So hopefully you will enjoy my selection, and by the end of this series I will have shown a good snapshot of real decent movies made in that decade. So for this video we're now looking at the year 1982, and it's interesting that of the 6 movies that I've picked out to showcase for this year, 5 of them are science fiction movies. And I do love science fiction. I own a lot of science fiction films. And when I kind of gathered them together, I realized how important 1982 was for science fiction, because there are some real classic films here that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to talk about the one movie first that isn't science fiction, and that is Rambo: First Blood, starring Sylvester Stallone. And it was interesting that when this movie first came out, Sylvester Stallone was most famous for the Rocky movies. He'd done 2 Rocky movies at that point. I think Rocky 3 came a year after First Blood. And First Blood has since spawned a lot of sequels, and it is still the best movie of all of them. Closely followed by Rambo: First Blood Part 2, but we'll get to that in another video. But I really like First Blood. It's a very simple plot. He kind of plays a drifter that is wandering into a town where the actor Brian Dennehy is the sheriff. And he doesn't take too kindly to outsiders and vagrants coming into his little town. And he kind of tells him in no uncertain terms that he's not welcome, and drives him to the town's limits and tells him to be on his way. And Rambo, quite rightly so, thinks, bugger this, I'm not going to be told what I can and can't do. I've not broken any laws. So the second Brian Dennehy drops him off, he just turns around and begins to walk back into the town again. And thus starts this sort of what ends up being a cat and mouse game where Rambo's character is then arrested under some stupid charges, and he breaks out of the jail and escapes up into the nearby mountains, where the local police force then go out in force to try and catch him. But what they don't realize is that Rambo is a highly skilled veteran, and he has a lot of skills in his armory regarding bushcraft and surviving in wildlife and things like that. So he really gives them a run for their money. And it's just a very good action film. And it was one of those movies that when we saw it for the first time in the early 80s, it really did give you the feeling that action movies have kind of changed now after Rambo: First Blood. And there's certainly going to be a few other movies in the 1980s in terms of action films that will give that same feeling. So we'll get to those in later videos. But suffice to say, First Blood is just such a terrific movie. It's aged really well. It uses real world locations in an incredible way. There's very little sort of studio work in this picture. It could have quite easily been very cheesy, but Sylvester Stallone really threw himself into the role in a physical way and put himself through the ringer. And it's just a great film. And the 4K is absolutely terrific. It was a real joy to watch this in 4K for the first time after watching it in reasonably okay DVD and Blu-ray copies So yeah, we're off to a strong start with 1982. Rambo First Blood is just an absolutely cracking movie. So the next movie is John Carpenter's classic, The Thing, possibly the best movie that John Carpenter ever directed, starring Kurt Russell. And this was a real surprise when I first saw this way back when on VHS. It did scare the crap out of me. The makeup effects by Rob Bottin are absolutely amazing. And it's just reeks of atmosphere with all these scientists that are holed up in this Arctic research station. And unbeknownst to them, a dog enters the station that's infested with this alien creature that has the ability to clone itself into different life forms. And then it's just a question of who is infected. How can we determine who is infected? And it's a real claustrophobic, exciting horror film with, as I say, incredible makeup effects and beautifully shot by the director of photography, Dean Cundey. And John Carpenter did a number of films with Dean Cundey earlier in his career. And again, it's aged really well. The makeup effects in it are absolutely incredible. And this is one of the many movies that Hollywood did a remake of. And I've never seen that remake. I have no intention of watching the remake. I've seen clips of it with the horrible CGI effects. And I just thought, oh God, why do Hollywood keep doing this? They take a movie that's absolutely faultless and they attempt to remake it and just make a complete hash of it. It's happened time and again. But we still have the original to enjoy. I'm aware this has got a 4K release. It's on my radar to upgrade this to 4K at some point, but for now I've got the Blu-ray. And the Blu-ray is very good quality. I've got no qualms with the Blu-ray at all. I absolutely love it. So yeah, already with 2 movies in, and as you can see, 1982 is shaping up to be a terrific year for film. So the next one is Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial. At the time that this was released, this became the highest grossing movie of all time. It was very much an event movie. It was one of those films similar to Star Wars where you've either seen it or you haven't seen it, and you felt kind of like an outcast if you hadn't seen it. I did see it at the cinema. I remember going to see this when I was 12, and I did cry at the end when E.T. got into his spaceship. And I don't mind admitting that even when I watch it now in my 50s, it still puts a lump in my throat when E.T. leaves. Steven Spielberg is very good at sentiment, and he doesn't hold back on emotions when it comes to his movies. And it's just a lovely, lovely film, and I'm so glad that they never made a sequel to E.T. It was often touted that there was going to be a sequel, but it doesn't need it. It's a perfect film in its own right. And it's a lovely snapshot of America at that time in the 80s with all the kids on the BMX bikes and things like that. And yeah, I love it. And the 4K is absolutely glorious. I've got pretty much most of Spielberg's earlier work on 4K. I think up to and including War of the Worlds, I think most of his movies I have on 4K because they deserve to be, because they're all classics. So yeah, absolutely great film. Really, really happy to own it as part of my collection. So the next film is Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Now, this is an absolutely fun one to talk about. Star Trek the Motion Picture is one of my favorite Star Trek movies. I would rank it number 2, with Wrath of Khan being number 1. And again, I saw this at the cinema when it was first released. I remember going to see it with my dad. And spoilers if you haven't seen Star Trek 2, but I can remember when Spock dies at the end of this movie and they're putting him into his little torpedo coffin, and they're about to blast him onto the Genesis planet. And I remember sitting in the cinema seat and looking up at my dad, and he had a tear in his eye, which was amazing because he was not really a Star Trek fan. He only went along to take me. But my God, what an absolutely fantastic Star Trek movie, and what a fantastic science fiction movie, full stop. They did everything right in terms of trying to fix the problems that a lot of people had with that first movie, because they called the first movie a bit cumbersome and slow. I didn't think it was, but I can see that some people would think that way. But Star Trek 2 really does raise the bar for Star Trek movies, and it never really got better than this one. Star Trek 4 was a very, very good film, but they never really managed to match the success of Wrath of Khan. They took an episode from the series called Space Seed, which was an early episode with Ricardo Montalban playing Khan, and they kind of brought him back for this movie. And he's just on a path of vengeance, and he basically wants to kill Admiral Kirk, and he'll stop at nothing to achieve that goal. So it's a really good movie in terms of its visual effects, and the battle that occurs between the Reliance that Khan takes control of and the Enterprise. They really go at each other, and yeah, it's just a fantastic film. I never really get bored of watching this movie. And it brings back lots of happy memories, because I remember going to see this at the cinema, and then I also remember when I was at school, we had a cinema club, and once a week you could buy a ticket for like 20 pence, and you could stop back after school on a particular day and go into a classroom where a teacher would set up a TV and a video recorder on a stand, and we'd all watch a science fiction movie immediately after school. And I remember one week we all watched Star Trek 2, and even watching it on a TV in a classroom with like 10 other kids was just such a fun experience. I've never forgotten that. So yes, it's a movie that has a special place in my heart. I'm more of a fan of the Star Trek movies than I am of the TV series. I wouldn't call myself a Trekkie, a diehard Trekkie, but I do love the original Star Trek movies. And I own all the Star Trek movies on physical media, but it seems to be the original run that I keep going back to, and the Next Generation movies less so. But yeah, absolutely great movie. So the next one is the Disney movie Tron from 1982. Now, this was a surprise when this first came out. I didn't see this at the cinema. I must have first watched this on a VHS rental, but it was a monumental movie because, as we all know, it used computer graphics in an extent that had never been done before in a motion picture. And certainly there are other movies that came out fairly close to this afterwards that were similar. The Last Starfighter comes to mind. But I just love the idea of Tron, and I love its visuals, and the idea of somebody getting pulled in to a computer world, and how that would work if the digital realm existed in a kind of physical way that you could move around in. And also it has the wonderful British actor David Warner, who plays a real good baddie in this, having just come off of doing Terry Gilliam's Time Bandits the year before. He plays a really good role in this. And as I say, the visuals at the time were just absolutely spectacular. And in a way, they still are. And then we had the new Tron movie about, gosh, how many years ago was that now? About 10 years ago, I think it was. And as I'm recording this video, there is another Tron movie that's going to be released later this year that I've seen the trailer for, and it does look very, very interesting. It's definitely one that I'll keep an eye out on. But the original Tron is still my favorite, and I think a good portion of it being my favorite is Jeff Bridges, and he's one of those actors that's just so enjoyable to watch. And I have a few of his movies in my collection, and I'll probably be talking about those in later videos. But yeah, it's a great film, and pretty good Blu-ray. It has a lot of extras on the Blu-ray. So I bought this as part of a double pack. So I also have Tron Legacy as well, and that is the 3D version that comes with the standard Blu-ray, because I do still have a 3D setup. And I did a video about that, by the way. If you haven't seen it, I'll just put a link up. It's a little fun watch if you're interested in the technology side of things. So the last movie that I want to talk about is possibly the biggest movie of 1982 for me, and I could also argue that it's the biggest film of the 1980s for me. And there was a time when this was my favorite movie of all time, but it got overtaken by Alien. They kept switching places. But about 20 years ago, I think Alien, I just suddenly thought, no, Alien is my favorite movie of all time, and it's just stayed there. And this movie is my number 2, and it's Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. And I am going to be doing a video about this. I've said this before, but of my top kind of 20 favorite movies, I've sort of held off talking about them because I want to do them justice when I do make a video about them. So I want to do something special for each of those movies. Suffice to say that Blade Runner is just an incredible movie. And to think that Ridley Scott did Alien, and what an amazing film that was, and the look of that movie was just incredible. To then go and a few years later make Blade Runner, which just totally blew me away when I first saw it. And the first time I saw this was on a VHS copy that one of my school friends loaned me. And I can only imagine, I didn't think of this at the time, but it must have been a pirated copy because it wasn't available to buy at that point. And I remember the quality was okay, but it wasn't brilliant. But even watching it on that second generation VHS copy, it just totally mesmerized me. And then over the years, I managed to get it on every format that's been available other than like Laserdisc. And then I actually saw it on the big screen when it had the director's cut re-release in 1992. And then I think it was in 2011, I want to say, they kind of did what they called the final cut, where they went back and changed some of the continuity issues that have always plagued this movie. I'll go into what they are when I make the video about it, but suffice to say, the 4K version of Blade Runner, the final cut, is just astounding. And the first time I sat down when I got this 4K disc and I darkened the room and put this movie on, and the opening sequence with the cityscape and all the lights, oh my God, it was just nirvana. I can't explain the feeling of seeing this movie in the best quality was just incredible. And it is just an incredible movie. And Harrison Ford, again, I said this with Indiana Jones. When you watch an Indiana Jones movie, you don't think of him as Han Solo, you just watch him as Indiana Jones. And when you watch Blade Runner, you don't think, oh look, it's Indiana Jones in a long trench coat. You just see Deckard. That's all you see. It's incredible. And yeah, what an absolutely fantastic film. And when you read up on the production problems that Ridley Scott had with this movie, and how he was constantly battling with the studio, and they were fighting against his vision and all the problems that he had, it's just even more incredible that we ended up with the film that we ended up with, because it's, Ridley Scott was, and to some degree still is, an amazing talent. There's all the movies that he made later in his career where he kind of went a bit more mainstream, should we say, and I wasn't really a fan of them, but in his early days, Ridley Scott was just untouchable. He was such an incredible filmmaker, and yeah, I'm really, really pleased that I've got this on 4K. So there we are. That is my 6 choices for the year 1982. I'm sure you'll agree with me that that was a very strong year for science fiction. And I'm really much looking forward to carrying on with these series, because there's a couple of years coming up in that decade that are particularly interesting. 1984 and 1987 are the 2 big years for me in terms of movies. So I'm looking forward to talking about the movies in those 2 years when we get to them. So I hope you keep coming back to watch the rest of this series, and I hope you enjoyed that little ramble. So if you did, give me a thumbs up, and I will see you very, very soon. So take care of yourselves. Bye for now.